It began with a single brick, not the weathered, crumbling clay of a Victorian tenement, but a block of fired red earth that refused to decay, found 12 feet below the asphalt of a modern Chicago intersection. It was marked with a geometric seal that appeared in no municipal record. Ask yourself why a city built on marshland requires a foundation of reinforced masonry stretching deeper than the height of its tallest skyscrapers. We are told the Great Fire of 1871 cleared the slate for progress. We are told the debris was used to raise the city, a feat of engineering meant to conquer the mud. But look closer at the photographs from the era. Look at the mud-caked windows of the first floors, now relegated to basements. Look at the arched doorways that sit halfway beneath the pavement. This is not the architecture of a rising city. This is the architecture of a buried one, not a renovation, not an expansion, a concealment. The official narrative functions as a shroud draped over our heirs, truth too heavy for our modern history to carry. We walk above a ghost geography, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath our feet is a lid. What if the history we consume is merely a localized amnesia, curated by those who inherited the ruins? Consider the sheer scale of the terraforming required to achieve what the 19th century history books describe. They speak of horse-drawn carriages and hand-cranked cranes, yet they present us with limestone monoliths and granite facades that would challenge the logistical capacity of a contemporary construction firm. We see these same structures in San Francisco, in Moscow, in Melbourne, and in Buenos Aires. A global aesthetic unified by a specific, lost understanding of load distribution and atmospheric energy appearing simultaneously across continents that were supposedly disconnected by months of sea travel. Not a coincidence, not a trend, a signature. We are taught to see these buildings as neoclassical or Beaux-Arts. Labels, designed to categorize and then dismiss. These terms act as intellectual gatekeeping, preventing us from asking why a fledgling colonial outpost in the middle of the Australian outback would prioritise the construction of a domed cathedral with walls 4 feet thick. The anomaly is not limited to the Subterranean. It exists in the erasure of the maps. If you search the archives of the 16th and 17th centuries, you will find a name that has been systematically scrubbed from the modern consciousness: Tartaria. It is not a city, it is not a tribe, it is a vast, interconnected empire spanning the Eurasian landmass, depicted with its own flag, its own heraldry, and its own sovereign borders. Yet, by the dawn of the 20th century, Tartaria vanished. It was redacted from the textbooks, replaced by a vacuum of nomadic tribes and empty steppes. Ask yourself how a civilization that commanded the largest landmass on Earth could simply dissolve without a trace. It was not a collapse. It was an institutional erasure. We are living in the aftermath of a reset, a global reorganization, where the victors did not just rewrite history, they deleted the predecessor. They moved into the vacant palaces, claimed the existing infrastructure as their own, and told us they had built it from nothing. The evidence is hidden in plain sight, masquerading as the marvels of the Industrial Revolution. Consider the World's Fairs of the late 1800s. We are told these white cities were temporary structures built of plaster and wood, designed to be demolished after 6 months. But look at the reflections in the lagoons of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Observe the intricate masonry, the massive domes, and the sophisticated electrical illumination that predated the widespread use of the light bulb in private homes. They tell us these were staff buildings, ephemeral stage sets. What if they were not built for the fair, but were the final remnants of the old world, showcased one last time before being dynamited to make way for the modern era? It is a pattern of destruction. Burn the evidence. Call it a fire. Call it a riot. Call it progress. But the basement levels remain. The tunnels remain. The Tartarian system is still there, pulsing beneath the concrete, a skeletal remains of a high technology civilization that understood the world in ways we are no longer permitted to imagine. Not a primitive past, not a slow climb toward enlightenment, something else entirely. We are conditioned to believe in a linear progression of technology, from the candle to the steam engine to the silicon chip. But the cathedrals and state houses of the old world suggest a mastery of a different kind. Look at the antennas atop the spires, the rose windows that mirror the geometry of cymatic patterns, and the massive pipe organs that could vibrate the very marrow of the human bone. These were not mere places of worship or governance. They were power plants. They were nodes in a grid that utilized the ionosphere, drawing free energy from the very air. This is the forbidden knowledge. The grid was not built by the titans of the Gilded Age. It was hijacked by them. They cut the wires, installed meters, and began charging us for what was once a global birthright. The energy crisis is a fabrication of the heirs, a way to keep the population tethered to a scarcity that does not naturally exist. If you descend into the maintenance tunnels of any major metropolitan centre, you will see the transition point. You will see where the modern concrete meets the ancient salt-glazed brick. You will see the sealed archways that lead further down into the strata of the first world. There is a heaviness to the air there, a sense of being watched by the architecture itself. The surveyors know. The city planners know. They work around these anomalies, routing subway lines and sewer systems to avoid the massive, indestructible vaults that sit beneath our financial districts. They call them natural formations or abandoned infrastructure, but they never provide the blueprints for their origin, because the blueprints do not exist in the public record. They are kept in the private archives of the institutions that rose from the ashes of the reset, the banking cartels, the royal societies, and the theological orders that transitioned from the old world to the new without losing their grip on the steering wheel of human perception. The narrative of the Great Reset is often discussed in future tense, but the primary reset has already occurred. It happened in the mid-19th century. It was a period of unprecedented chaos, wars, fires, and natural disasters that conveniently targeted the hubs of the old civilization. In the wake of this vacuum, a new type of human was introduced: the foundlings, the orphan trains. Ask yourself why, between 1850 and 1930, hundreds of thousands of children were shipped across the United States and dispersed into the interior. Where did they come from? Why were their records destroyed? They were the blank slates. They were the children of the old world, stripped of their heritage and indoctrinated into the new history. They were taught that the ruins they played in were built by their own pioneering ancestors, who had somehow achieved the impossible with hammers and nails. This is the ultimate gaslighting of a species, to make us forget who we are, while standing in the middle of our own ancestors' achievements. We see the signature of the erasure in the very way we measure time and distance, the standardization of the clock, the implementation of the Gregorian calendar, the shift from local measurements to the metric system. These were all tools of the consolidation. They were meant to sever our connection to the natural frequencies of the earth, the same frequencies the Tartarian system was designed to harness. The old architecture was tuned, it was harmonic. The modern world is dissonant. We live in boxes of glass and steel that drain our energy rather than replenish it. We are kept in a state of perpetual low-level anxiety, disconnected from the resonant power of the structures that still sit beneath us. The architects of the reset understood that if you control the environment, you control the psyche. By burying the old world, they buried the human potential for autonomy. Every time a renovation uncovers a new set of tunnels or a buried street level, the media treats it as a charming curiosity, a time capsule from a simpler era. But there is nothing simple about a 3-story building that begins 15 feet underground. There is nothing charming about the fact that our history is a series of curated lies. The investigators who push too deep into these archives often find themselves hitting a wall of national security or historical preservation. The gatekeepers are vigilant. They know that if the public ever realized the true nature of the Tartarian system, the entire structure of modern authority would collapse. The debt-based economy, the dependence on fossil fuels, the hierarchical control of information, all of it relies on the premise that we are at the pinnacle of human achievement. To admit that we are actually living in a degraded, simplified version of a much greater past would be the end of their reign. So we are left with the fragments, the anomalous bricks, the star forts that dot the globe, designed with a fractal precision that serves no defensive purpose against traditional ballistics. The asylums and hospitals that look like royal palaces, built to house the broken survivors of the transition. The silence of the steppes where an empire once stood. It is a mystery that requires us to look not just at what is there, but at what is missing. The gaps in the record are the loudest parts of the story. They speak of a world that was unified, energetic, and vast, a world that was stolen from us and buried beneath a layer of mud and lies. Ask yourself, how long can a foundation of falsehoods support the weight of the truth? The Tartarian system is not dead. It is merely waiting. And as the modern world begins to crack under its own artificial pressure, the old world is starting to bleed through the seams. The transition from the old world to the new was not a gentle fading, but a violent amputation. Consider the star forts, those massive polygonal bastions scattered across every continent, from the shores of Florida to the heart of Russia and the remote islands of the Pacific. Conventional history labels them as defensive fortifications designed to deflect cannon fire. Yet, when viewed from above, their geometry reveals something far more sophisticated than military utility. They are resonators. They are fractal patterns etched into the earth with mathematical precision, often built upon nodes where the earth's telluric currents are strongest. Not fortresses, not bunkers, something else. Ask yourself why a military commander would obsess over the perfect symmetry of a 12-pointed star when a simple wall would suffice. The answer lies in the interaction between stone, water, and frequency. These sites were part of a planetary stabilization system, a means of grounding the atmospheric energy harvested by the spires of the Tartarian cities. They were the stabilizers of a global circuit, and their subsequent conversion into prisons and military outposts is the ultimate irony of our era. What if the great mud flood was not a metaphorical drowning, but a literal inundation of liquefied earth? Across the globe, from the streets of London to the colonial outposts of New Zealand, we find the same physical evidence, the buried first floor. This is not the result of architectural fashion or the gradual accumulation of dust. We are looking at a catastrophic event that deposited millions of tons of silt and clay across the urban centres of the world, effectively resetting the ground level. The institutions tell us these buildings were designed with light wells and basement entrances. But why would an architect carve intricate life-size windows into a foundation that was meant to be submerged in dirt? The logic fails under the slightest pressure. Not a design choice, not a drainage solution, a disaster. The survivors of this event did not rebuild. They excavated. They dug out the upper floors of the existing structures and claimed them. The mud was the eraser that cleared the board for the current administrators to move in and declare a new world order. Observe the strange uniformity of the 19th century mental asylums. These were often the grandest structures in their respective regions, sprawling, palatial complexes with Gothic spires, immense vaulted ceilings, and lush, meticulously landscaped grounds. We are told these were built by the benevolent state to care for the surging population of the insane. But look at the timing. These asylums appeared precisely during the period of the orphan trains and the Great Migrations. What if these were not hospitals, but processing centres for those who refused to accept the new narrative? If you remembered the world before the mud, if you spoke of the free energy grid or the empire of Tartaria, you were not a historian, you were a patient. The insanity was simply the retention of forbidden memory. These palaces were repurposed to contain the last witnesses of the old system, while their children were sent on trains to be re-educated in the frontier schools. The erasure was multi-generational, targeting both the architecture and the ancestry of the survivors. This institutional gatekeeping extends into the very bedrock of our science. We are taught that the atmospheric electricity experiments of Nikola Tesla were the eccentricities of a lone genius. But what if Tesla wasn't inventing something new, but rather attempting to reconstruct the lost technique of the Tartarian era? He spoke of drawing power from the medium and transmitting it wirelessly through the earth. He was describing the function of the cathedrals. The towers he built, like Wardenclyffe, were replicas of the ancient spires that had been stripped of their mercury-filled capacitors and gold-plated finials. The Industrial Revolution was not a leap forward, it was a desperate scramble to find a taxable alternative to the free energy that had once powered the globe. The smokestacks of the 20th century are the scars of this transition, replacing the clean, resonant vibration of the Tartarian system with the combustion of dead matter. Not an evolution, a regression. The maps do not lie, even when the historians do. If you examine the Mercator and Hondius maps of the 1600s, you see Great Tartaria occupying the space we now call Russia, northern China, and Central Asia. It is listed as an independent power, often more vast than the Roman Empire at its height. Yet, by the mid-1800s, it vanishes. It is replaced by the Russian Empire and the Qing dynasty. This was not a slow decline, it was a coordinated conquest. The Napoleonic Wars and the Crimean War were not mere territorial disputes. They were the cleaning crew. They were the kinetic phase of the reset used to dismantle the infrastructure of the Tartarian sovereign and replace it with the centralized banking states of the West. The fires that leveled Moscow in 1812 and Washington, D.C. in 1814 were tactical strikes against the command and control centers of the old world. What we call modern history is simply the ledger of the victors, written in the blood of a civilization that was too large to be forgotten, so it had to be systematically hidden. Ask yourself about the Great Wall of China. We are told it was built over centuries to keep out Mongol raiders. But if you look at the orientation of the embrasures and the crenellations on certain sections of the wall, you find a disturbing anomaly. In many places, the defensive positions are facing south. They are built to defend against an enemy coming from the direction of China, not the north. This suggests the wall was not built by the Chinese dynasties we know, but by the Tartarian power to the north, defending its territory against the encroaching expansion of the reset. The wall is a border marker of a lost empire, later co-opted and rebranded by the new administrators of the region. This pattern of rebranding is the hallmark of the erasure trope. Take an existing wonder, attach a fabricated timeline to it, and punish anyone who questions the engineering feasibility of the story. The sensory experience of our modern cities is one of profound disconnection. We are surrounded by historical buildings that feel fundamentally different from the glass boxes that surround them. There is a weight, a resonance, and a dignity to the old masonry that modern construction cannot replicate. This is because the old buildings were designed to be in sympathy with the human biological field. They used specific ratios, the golden mean, the Fibonacci sequence, to create spaces that amplified vitality. The reset replaced this with efficiency. The modern office building is a cage designed to minimize movement and maximize output. The contrast of scale is meant to make the individual feel small and insignificant, a mere cog in the machine of the state. The Tartarian system, by contrast, was built on a scale that was monumental yet harmonic, suggesting a civilization that viewed the human being as a conduit for the divine, rather than a resource to be extracted. Look at the photographs of the great cities in the 1850s and 60s. Look at the empty streets. In city after city, Paris, New York, Moscow, we see magnificent, wide boulevards and towering architecture, but almost no people. Where there are people, they look like squatters. They are dressed in rags, moving through the streets with a sense of bewilderment. They do not look like the architects of the grandeur that surrounds them. They look like refugees who have just emerged from a cellar, and in these photos the trees are always small, newly planted. There are no ancient oaks in the parks of these historic cities. Everything is new except for the stone. This is the visual evidence of the repopulation. The old inhabitants were gone, cleansed, buried, or relocated, and a new, manageable population was being moved into the ready-made infrastructure. They inherited the keys to the kingdom, but they were told they had built the locks themselves. The silence of the academic world regarding these anomalies is not accidental. It is the result of institutional gatekeeping. To question the timeline of the 19th century is to forfeit one's career. The universities are the guardians of the reset, ensuring that each new generation of historians is trained to ignore the physical contradictions right in front of them. They focus on the minutiae of political treaties and royal lineages, while ignoring the fact that the load distribution of a 500-ton granite block in a colonial courthouse is physically impossible for the tools of the era. They maintain the illusion of knowledge while presiding over a massive collective amnesia. They tell us that the Dark Ages were a period of regression, but perhaps the true Dark Age is the one we are living in now, a period where the light of the past has been obscured by a thick veil of propaganda and concrete. What remains is a series of unresolved philosophical open loops. If we were once part of a global high technology civilization that mastered the very energy of the atmosphere, what does that say about our current trajectory? We are told we are the most advanced humans to ever walk the earth, yet we cannot replicate the architecture of our great-grandfathers without an astronomical budget and a decade of planning. We are told we are free, yet we are billed for every breath of energy we consume. The Tartarian system beneath our modern world is a reminder of a lost potential, a ghost limb that still itches. We walk through the ruins of a giant's house, pretending we are the giants, but the bricks are still there, 12 feet down. The star forts are still there, humming with a frequency we have forgotten how to hear, and the question remains, hanging in the air like the static before a storm. If they could erase an entire empire in a single century, what are they erasing from our world right now? The deeper one digs into the mechanical heart of the 19th century, the more the gears of history begin to slip. Consider the enigmatic presence of the pneumatic tube systems that once pulsed beneath the streets of New York, London, and Paris. We are told these were mere novelties, primitive precursors to the digital age, used to ferry mail and small parcels through pressurized brass veins. But look at the sheer diameter of the tunnels discovered during the expansion of the London Underground. Look at the atmospheric railways of South Devon, where trains were supposedly propelled by the weight of the air itself. Not a fad, not a failure, a fragmented recovery of a much older science. These were the remnants of a transit system that did not rely on the clumsy combustion of coal or the erratic pulse of early steam, but on the manipulation of pressure and vacuum, a technology that suggests a sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics and load distribution far beyond the capabilities of the soot-stained engineers we find in our textbooks. Ask yourself why, after perfecting a silent, emission-free mode of transport, the world's governments abruptly abandoned it in favour of the loud, toxic and inefficient internal combustion engine. Not an upgrade, a forced pivot. The institutions could not meter the air, and so the air was made obsolete. What if the great exploration of the American West or the Siberian taiga was not a voyage of discovery, but a survey of the wreckage? The pioneers are depicted as rugged individuals carving a life out of the wilderness, yet time and again they arrived at their destinations only to find massive, abandoned stone foundations and perfectly levelled plateaus. They found Native American mounds that, upon closer inspection, revealed internal masonry and copper wiring. They found salt mines in the middle of the continent that were carried with a geometric precision that defied the hand chisel. This was not a virgin land, it was a salvage yard. The westward expansion was a massive looting operation disguised as a manifest destiny. The pioneers were the clean-up crews, tasked with repurposing the ruins of the Tartarian system for the new administrators. If a structure was too grand to be explained away, it was converted into a state capital or a university. If it was too damaged, it was buried. The erasure was not merely literary, it was physical, a literal terraforming of the past to fit the narrow constraints of the present narrative. The mystery of the great fires takes on a more sinister hue when one maps their frequency across the 1800s. Between 1830 and 1900, nearly every major city in the Western world suffered a catastrophic conflagration that levelled its core. London, Hamburg, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, Toronto. The list is exhaustive. We are told these were accidents caused by overturned lanterns or faulty chimneys, but look at the aftermath. These fires had a peculiar habit of incinerating stone and brick while leaving nearby wooden shacks untouched. They melted iron. They turned granite to dust. This is not the behaviour of a common house fire. This is the signature of high heat directed energy, a systematic thermal cleaning of the old world's infrastructure. The fires provided the legal and physical pretext to clear these slums, which were often the most ornate parts of the old city, and replace them with the simplified, manageable architecture of the reset. Not a tragedy, a demolition. What if the fire departments of the 19th century were not established to put fires out, but to ensure that only the targeted buildings were destroyed, acting as the custodians of the purge? Observe the recurring motif of the Crystal Palace. The 1851 Great Exhibition in London showcased a structure of glass and iron so vast it seemed to defy gravity. It was built, we are told, in just 9 months by a gardener named Joseph Paxton. Ask yourself how a civilization that primarily travelled by horse and cart managed to manufacture, transport, and assemble 300,000 panes of glass and 4,500 tons of iron with such speed. The logistical load distribution alone would bankrupt a modern firm. The truth is far more unsettling. These glass cathedrals were not new constructions. They were repurposed conservatories of the Tartarian era, designed to harness solar energy and maintain a perpetual spring for a global population. They were the greenhouses of a lost Eden, stripped of their function and used to display the wonders of the industrial age, the very machines that would eventually replace the elegant technology of the past. The demolition of the Crystal Palace in 1936 was the final act of the erasure, a symbolic destruction of the last transparent piece of our true history. The staccato rhythm of our modern life is a deliberate break from the resonant harmony of the old world. If you look at the musical pitch of the 19th century, you find it was tuned to A equals 432 Hertz, a frequency that is mathematically consistent with the patterns of the universe and the biology of the human heart. After the reset, the standard was moved to A equals 440 Hertz. This is a dissonant tone, one that creates internal tension and makes the listener more susceptible to external suggestion. This is the auditory layer of the Tartarian system's destruction. The cathedrals were acoustic amplifiers designed to bathe the population in healing frequencies. The bells that once hung in their towers were not for telling time. They were sonic vibrators that cleared the air of pathogens and synchronized the brainwaves of the city. When the new administrators took over, they melted the bells for cannons and changed the frequency of our music. They replaced the healing hum of the earth with the jagged noise of the machine. Not a change in taste, a psychological siege. Think about the antiquity of the world's oldest museums. Many of them were established in the mid to late 1800s, precisely when the evidence of the old world was being cleared away. These institutions act as the laundromats of history. They take artifacts of high technology, Tartarian origin, and relabel them as ceremonial objects or votive offerings. A precision machined copper coil becomes a necklace. A mercury-based power cell becomes a perfume bottle. By placing these items behind glass and surrounding them with academic jargon, they render the technology invisible. They tell us that the people who built the pyramids and the star forts were obsessed with death and the afterlife, because that is the only way to explain why they would invest so much energy into structures that serve no practical purpose in our modern, scarcity-driven economy. They project our own limitations onto the past, ensuring that we never recognize the ruins for what they truly are. The urban exploration movement is, at its core, an unconscious attempt to reconnect with this buried heritage. When people descend into the sub-basements of old hotels or explore the abandoned industrial shells of the Rust Belt, they are not looking for trash. They are looking for a pulse. They find vaulted ceilings in sewers. They find gold leaf in the walls of factories. They find a level of craftsmanship that suggests the workers of the past were not the exploited labourers of Dickensian nightmares, but artisans who lived in a world of abundance. The Great Depression and the Industrial Revolution were narratives created to explain why life had become so much harder, why the beauty of the old world had been replaced by the utility of the new. The explorers are the new archaeologists, bypassing the institutional gatekeepers to touch the physical reality of the reset. They are the ones who see the arches that lead into the earth and ask the forbidden question, what else is down there? Not only was the architecture buried, but the very language of the old world was dismantled. If you read the scientific journals of the early 1800s, you find a vocabulary that has since been purged. Terms like ether, vitalic force, and terrestrial magnetism were the cornerstones of a science that viewed the universe as a living, energetic whole. After the reset, these were replaced by the laws of thermodynamics, specifically the second law, which dictates that everything must decay and that energy is always lost. This was the intellectual cage. By convincing us that energy is scarce and that the universe is a dying machine, the administrators ensured that we would never look for the free, ambient power that the Tartarian system once tapped into. We were taught to believe in gravity while being told to forget about levity. We were given a science of the graveyard to explain a world that was once teeming with light. The contrast of scale between the government buildings of the 19th century and the people they supposedly serve is a testament to this power shift. Why does a local courthouse in a small Midwestern town need 30-foot ceilings and marble columns imported from Italy? Why does a post office in a rural village require a dome that rivals the Pantheon? It is because these were not built by the local government. They were the pre-existing nodes of a global administration, repurposed to give the new, small-scale authorities a veneer of ancient legitimacy. The people were made to feel like guests in their own land, dwarfed by and architecture they could not possibly have built. This creates a psychological dependency, a sense that the state is an eternal, monolithic entity rather than a collection of individuals. The buildings are the propaganda, a silent, stony reminder that the power they represent is far older and more formidable than the voters realise. Ask yourself, if the history of the last 200 years is a carefully constructed stage play, who is the audience? Perhaps it is not just us. Perhaps the erasure is meant to hide the truth from the future as much as the present. By burying the Tartarian system, they have created a closed loop of human experience, a cycle of progress and collapse that keeps us from ever reaching the level of the previous civilization. We are the inheritors of a magnificent estate who have been told we are lucky to live in the potting shed, but the cracks in the narrative are widening. Every time a new subway construction reveals a buried palace, every time an old map is leaked from a private collection, the ghost of Tartaria grows more substantial. The philosophical open loop remains. Are we the peak of human evolution, or are we simply the survivors of a long, dark winter, living in the attic of a house we no longer know how to heat? The erasure is not merely a matter of stone and soil. It is a matter of the very water that flows through our veins and our valleys. Consider the canal craze of the early 19th century. We are told that men with shovels and pickaxes carved thousands of miles of perfectly levelled waterways across the rugged terrain of North America and Europe in a matter of years. Look at the Erie Canal. Look at the precision of its stone locks and the impossible geometry of its embankments. Ask yourself how a pre-industrial society, plagued by malaria and lacking heavy machinery, could move more earth than the builders of the Panama Canal. Not a feat of manual labour, not a desperate commercial venture, something else. These were not new excavations. They were the dredging of an ancient global hydraulic system. The Tartarian world was a world of water, a civilization that used the conductivity of the tides and the flow of the rivers to transport not just goods, but information and energy. When the reset occurred, these arteries were reclaimed, relabeled as modern engineering marvels, and eventually filled in with the debris of the old world once the railroad cartels demanded a monopoly on motion. What if the great pioneers were actually the great scavengers? Throughout the 1800s, the official record is filled with accounts of explorers stumbling upon magnificent abandoned cities in the depths of the jungles and the heights of the mountains. They tell us these were the ruins of the Mayans, the Incas, or the Khmer. But look at the architectural DNA. You find the same vaulted arches, the same star-shaped foundations, and the same red brick craftsmanship in the jungles of Cambodia as you do in the heart of Germany. This is a global architectural signature that transcends the local cultures we are taught to believe in. The discovery of these sites was actually the cataloguing of a fallen network. The institutions didn't find these cities, they re-established contact with them. They stripped the gold, melted the copper, and then sent in the archaeologists to weave a tale of primitive temples and tombs. It is the ultimate erasure. To take a functional piece of high technology infrastructure and tell the world it was a place where savages sacrificed their children to the sun. The skeletal remains of the Tartarian energy grid are hidden in the most mundane places, the lampposts. If you look at the ornate street lamps of the late 19th century, particularly those in the grand plazas of Europe and the Americas, you will notice they lack wires. They are topped with strange bulbous glass or metal finials that resemble the atmospheric collectors of the cathedrals. We are told these were gas lamps, yet the light they produced was described as bright as day, a cold white luminescence that terrified the uninitiated. This was the lux of the old world, a form of wireless lighting that drew energy from the ambient ether. After the reset, these lamps were either removed or converted to the primitive, wire-bound electrical systems we use today. The original collectors were modernized, which is a euphemism for being neutered. Ask yourself why we have traded the boundless, clean light of the atmosphere for a grid that is fragile, expensive, and designed to fail. Not progress, a tactical downgrade. Observe the phenomenon of the star fort in the context of the world's most prestigious universities and medical centres. Many of these institutions are built directly atop the ruins of these geometric bastions: Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard. Their foundations are rooted in a geography that was already ancient before the first lecture was ever given. The institutions of higher learning were placed on these specific nodes to control the narrative. They are the high priests of the reset, tasked with ensuring that no student ever looks too closely at the load distribution of the chapel or the strange electromagnetic properties of the library's basement. They sit on the power spots of the old world like a lid on a boiling pot. By occupying the sites of the Tartarian system, they prevent anyone else from using them, effectively monopolizing the physical and intellectual landscape of the planet. The language of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment serves as a chronological buffer, a way to push the achievements of the Tartarian era further back into a safe, untouchable past. They tell us that humanity forgot how to build with stone and then rediscovered it. They tell us we lost the secret of Roman concrete and then found it again centuries later. Ask yourself, Does a species simply forget how to build its own shelters? Does it lose the ability to create the very infrastructure that sustains its life, only if that memory is forcibly removed? The Dark Ages were not a period of cultural decline, but a period of intense censorship. It was the time of the first great cleaning, where the maps were burned and the genealogies were falsified. We are told we emerged from the darkness into the light of the modern era. But what if the light is just the glare of a spotlight, blinding us to the reality that we are living in the ruins of a much brighter day? Think about the great statues of the 19th century, the Statue of Liberty, the massive bronze figures atop the state houses, the colossal monuments in the squares of Moscow and London. We are told these were gifts or artistic expressions. But look at their composition. They are almost always made of highly conductive metals: copper, bronze, iron. They are often placed at the highest point of a city or at the mouth of a major harbour. They are not art. They are components. They were the ground rods and receivers of the atmospheric grid, the final touch points of a system that tuned the frequency of the city to the resonance of the planet. Today, they are hollow shells, their internal workings removed, their purpose forgotten. They stand as silent, metallic witnesses to a science we are no longer allowed to practice. The contrast of scale between these giants and the modern humans who walk beneath them is a constant, unspoken reminder of our own diminished state. The erasure trope is most visible in the way we are taught to perceive the Industrial Revolution. We are shown images of soot-covered children and smog-choked cities as if this was the natural birth of the modern world. But this was the era of the hijack. The new administrators needed a way to monetize the existence of humanity. You cannot charge a man for the air he breathes or the ambient energy his house collects, but you can charge him for the coal he burns and the oil he consumes. The revolution was not a technological breakthrough, it was a coup. It was the moment the free, clean and silent Tartarian system was dismantled and replaced by a noisy, dirty and profitable machine. The history books celebrate this as the Age of Steam, but it should be called the Age of Enslavement. We were sold the illusion of power while our true power was being buried in the mud. Every modern city has a forbidden zone, an area where the old infrastructure is so prominent that it cannot be explained away. These are the fenced-off utility yards, the historical districts where no digging is allowed, and the vast underground complexes beneath our seats of government. If you look at the Capitol Hill of any Western nation, you are looking at the crown of a subterranean mountain of masonry. These buildings are connected by tunnels that span miles, many of which were already there before the founding fathers arrived. These are the command centers of the reset, the places where the heirs of the takeover manage the ongoing amnesia of the world. They use the old tunnels to move without being seen, and they use the old vaults to store the evidence of their crime. The public is allowed to see the marble facades, but the Tartarian system beneath remains the private property of the state. The orphaning of the human race is the final and most cruel step of the process. By destroying our history, the administrators have made us into a species without a home. We wander through the world with a sense of solastalgia, the feeling of being homesick while still in our own houses. We look at the great cathedrals and feel a pang of recognition, a memory that we cannot quite grasp. We are told we are the descendants of savages who crawled out of the dirt, when the evidence suggests we are the survivors of a golden age who were pushed into the mud. This psychological trauma is what keeps the modern world in a state of perpetual conflict. We are like children who have been told our parents never existed, left to fight over the scraps in the nursery while the inheritance is locked in the basement. As the decade of the 2020s progresses, the cracks in the modern facade are becoming impossible to ignore. The technology we were promised is failing. The energy grid is faltering. The institutions are losing their grip on the narrative. People are beginning to look at the mud-caked windows and the star forts with fresh eyes. They are asking the what if and the why. The Tartarian system is not just a collection of old buildings. It is a possibility. It is the proof that human life can be lived in harmony with the earth, without scarcity, without pollution, and without the constant supervision of a parasitic elite. The philosophical open loop is closing. The question is no longer, did this happen? But what will we do now that we know? The ground beneath our feet is speaking. Are we ready to listen to what bricks are saying? The architectural census of the 19th century reveals a startling frequency of what can only be described as monumental displacement. In cities across the Midwestern United States, we find state houses and municipal buildings of such immense structural gravity that they seem to have sunk into the landscape rather than having been built upon it. Consider the Iowa state capitol, with its 5 golden domes and its meticulously carved granite skin. We are told it was constructed by a pioneer population that had only just arrived in the territory, a people struggling with basic survival, yet they somehow possessed the surplus capital and technical mastery to erect a structure that rivals the palaces of the Romanovs. Ask yourself, where are the kilns that fired the millions of precision bricks? Where are the quarries that provided the thousands of tons of polished stone? Where are the roads that didn't collapse under the weight of such massive load distribution? Records are curiously silent on the logistics, offering only artists' renderings and vague anecdotes of local craftsmanship, not a construction project, a reclamation. What if these pioneers were simply the first people allowed back into a restricted zone, assigned to clean the mud from the windows and hang a flag from the spire? The anomaly of the star fort geometry suggests a global standard of subterranean engineering that defies modern military logic. If you examine the layout of Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas, you see 16 million bricks laid in the middle of the ocean, miles from any source of fresh water or clay. History tells us it was a strategic outpost built to protect the Gulf Coast. But why the intricate hexagonal symmetry? Why the massive cisterns designed to collect and filter rainwater through specific mineral layers? It functions more like a giant capacitor than a fortress. Look at the masonry. There are no gaps, no imperfections, no signs of the hand-to-hand labour we are told defined the era. The structure is a single unified machine, integrated into the coral reef itself. This is the hallmark of the Tartarian system, a mastery of materials that treated stone as a programmable medium. When the reset occurred, these machines were stripped of their internal components and rebranded as historic forts, their true function as energy nodes or water purification hubs obscured by the narrative of war. Observe the pattern of institutional erasure within the world of cartography. In the late 18th century, the British and French empires embarked on a series of mapping expeditions that lasted decades. We are told these were for the benefit of navigation and trade. But what if they were for the purpose of redaction? If you compare the maps produced after 1800 to those from the mid-1600s, you see a systematic thinning of the world. Great Tartaria is replaced by a series of smaller, fragmented territories. with names that carry no history. The massive inland seas and complex river systems of the old world maps are simplified or, in some cases, removed entirely. This is not the result of better surveying. It is the result of a changing reality. The maps were rewritten to reflect a world that had been physically altered, perhaps by the same event that deposited the mud, and to ensure that the survivors would never find their way back to the centres of power that had been buried. The new world was not a discovery. It was a rebranding of a very old world that had been forcibly silenced. Think about the sheer scale of the reconstruction efforts that followed the Great Fires. In every instance, the new buildings that rose from the ashes were markedly inferior to the ones they replaced. They were smaller, thinner, and built with cheaper materials. The ornate domes were replaced by flat roofs. The granite was replaced by wood and plaster. This is the visual language of the decline. The administrators of the reset were working with limited resources and a dwindling knowledge base. They could not replicate the Tartarian system, so they simply mimicked its aesthetic on a smaller, more manageable scale. This is why the neoclassical buildings of the 1900s feel like hollow imitations of the structures from the 1800s. They are the stage sets of a civilization that is pretending to be its own ancestor. The contrast of scale is a physical manifestation of the psychological distance between the people of the old world and the subjects of the new. The mystery of the orphan trains remains one of the most unsettling chapters of this narrative. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 children were taken from the streets of eastern cities and shipped to the rural interior. We are told this was a charitable effort by the Children's Aid Society to find homes for the unwanted. But ask yourself, where did these thousands of children come from? How does a society suddenly produce a surplus of heirs? 250,000 orphans in a single generation. They were the unhistoried. They were the children of the reset, taken from parents who had been institutionalized or cleansed during the transition. By scattering them across the continent and giving them new names and new lives, the administrators effectively severed the last living link to the Tartarian past. These children grew up believing they were the offspring of poor immigrants, never realizing they were the heirs to the very cities they were being taught to pioneer. The erasure was not just on paper, it was in the DNA. The technology of the old world was not just about energy, it was about the manipulation of time and space. Look at the clock towers that dominate the squares of every old world city. We are told they were built so the working class could tell time. But why the immense height? Why the bells that can be heard for miles? Why the intricate clockworks that track the movements of the planets and the phases of the moon with astronomical precision? These towers were the pulse generators of the Tartarian system. They synchronized the frequency of the city, ensuring that the human biological clock was aligned with the celestial cycles. After the reset, these towers were converted into simple timekeeping devices, their gears simplified and their celestial functions disabled. We were moved from universal time to industrial time, a linear, fragmented version of reality that serves the needs of the factory and the bank rather than the soul. The bells no longer heal, they merely warn us that we are late for our shifts. The silence of the earth itself is perhaps the most profound evidence of the erasure. When you stand in the middle of a star fort or inside the nave of a great cathedral, there is a specific acoustic quality, a stillness that feels heavy and resonant. This is because these structures were built to be silent. They did not have the hum of electricity or the vibration of combustion. They were tuned to the Schumann resonance, the natural heartbeat of the planet. The modern world is a cacophony of artificial frequencies, Wi-Fi, cellular signals, power lines that mask this natural silence. The Tartarian system was a technology of the quiet, a civilization that understood that the most powerful forces are the ones you cannot hear. By filling the world with noise, the new administrators have made it impossible for us to hear the ground speaking. They have drowned out the evidence of the past with the static of the present. Look at the photographs of the ruins of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Amidst the rubble, you see buildings that look like they have been there for 1,000 years, their thick masonry exposed and their ornate facades crumbled. But look at the foundations. You see the same buried arches and the same multi-level basements that we find in Chicago and London. The earthquake didn't just destroy the city, it revealed the layers beneath it. The subsequent rebuilding of San Francisco was a massive operation of concealment. They didn't just rebuild, they paved over. They used the rubble of the old world to fill in the gaps of the new, ensuring that the lower city would remain hidden forever. This is the pattern of institutional gatekeeping. Every disaster is an opportunity to further bury the truth. They tell us the city was born from the ashes, but the reality is that the ashes were used to suffocate the original. What if the Wild West was actually a post-apocalyptic landscape? The images we see of the frontier show small wooden towns built in the shadow of massive abandoned stone ruins. We are told these ruins were Spanish missions or ancient ruins of unknown origin. But look at the architecture. It is Tartarian. It is the same red brick and limestone that we see in Moscow. The cowboys and outlaws were the scavengers of this fallen world, living in the skeletons of a civilization they didn't understand. The wars with the indigenous populations were not about land, they were about the control of these sites. The tribes were the protectors of the old geography, the last ones who knew the secrets of the star forts and the energy nodes. They had to be moved, and their history had to be rewritten as a primitive struggle for survival rather than a sophisticated defense of a global network. The philosophical open loop that remains is the question of the inheritance. If we are living in a world that was stolen and rebranded, what is our responsibility to the truth? We are taught to be grateful for the progress of the modern era. But if that progress is built on a foundation of erasure and theft, is it truly ours? The Tartarian system is a reminder that we are capable of so much more than we have been led to believe. We are not a species of scarcity and struggle. We are a species of abundance and harmony. The bricks beneath our feet are not just history, they are a blueprint. They are a call to remember who we were so that we can decide who we will become. The investigation is not just about the past, it is about the future. As we peel back the layers of the reset, we are not just finding ruins, we are finding ourselves. The question is, are we brave enough to reclaim what was never truly lost, but only hidden? The erasure is most evident in the physical scars left upon the Earth's topography, the canal system that spans continents. We are told that these thousands of miles of perfectly levelled, stone-lined waterways were dug by men with shovels in the early 1800s. Look at the Erie Canal or the massive networks in Russia. The engineering precision required to maintain a consistent water level over hundreds of miles of varying terrain is a feat that challenges modern GPS-guided machinery. Ask yourself, where did the millions of tons of excavated earth go? There are no massive mounds adjacent to these channels, not a construction project, not a manual. Labour miracle. It was a dredging. The new administrators were merely clearing the silt from a pre-existing Tartarian hydraulic network. They moved into a functional global grid and claimed they had dug it from the dirt. This is the hallmark of the parasitic inheritance, claiming the work of the predecessor as the innovation of the successor. Consider the old world lighthouses. We see them on every coastline, majestic stone towers built on impossible cliffs and remote rock outcroppings. The official history says they were built to guide ships with oil lamps and mirrors, but look at their structure. They are often built with the same red brick and conductive metal caps as the inland cathedrals. What if they weren't lamps at all? What if they were nodes in a coastal energy grid, drawing power from the friction of the tides and the salinity of the sea? They were the coastal batteries of the Tartarian system, providing wireless power to the ships that once navigated the world without the need for coal or wind. When the reset came, the lenses were replaced with simple lights, and the narrative was changed to one of primitive navigation. We are taught to see a lonely guardian in a tower, when we should be seeing a power station at the edge of the world. The Great Exhibition of 1851 in London, and the subsequent fairs that followed, functioned as the final inventory of the stolen world. The Crystal Palace was not a temporary structure. It was a captured conservatory of the old civilization. By displaying the wonders of industry inside these magnificent glass and iron structures, the administrators were performing a psychological sleight of hand. They showed the public the technology of the past while telling them it was the technology of the future. Then they burned the buildings. The destruction by fire of almost every major World's Fair structure served to ensure that the public could never return to study craftsmanship or engineering. They gave us a glimpse of the kingdom, then turned it to ash to ensure we remained satisfied with the hovels they provided. This brings us to the most unsettling pattern, the institutional gatekeeping of the foundations. Every major university, every national museum, and every seat of government is built directly on top of the most significant Tartarian ruins. They are not just buildings, they are corks. They were placed there to occupy the space and to prevent any unauthorized investigation into what lies beneath. The Smithsonian Institution, the British Museum, the Vatican, these are the keepers of the redacted files. They are the ones who decide which artifacts are ritual objects and which are anomalies to be hidden in the basement. They have built a wall of academic jargon around the truth, making the investigation of our own history feel like a descent into madness. But the bricks do not lie. The star forts do not lie. And as the modern world begins to fray at the edges, the Tartarian system is waiting to be remembered.